This is Alex Le Voci Sayad, journalist and educator. We are in Voices here in Firenze, Italy. I'm here with two amazing professionals that I admire, I work with. Mademoiselle Adeline Hulin from Paris, from UNESCO Paris. She's the head of the Media and Information Literacy Unit and the headquarters of UNESCO in Paris. And I'm here also with Julia Haas. We have just shared a panel, an amazing panel here at Voices. She's an international law expert and advisor for the OSCE Representative on Freedom of the Media. So thank you so much for joining us for this EAVI conversation. It's a pleasure. I'd like to start asking about the main topic of this conference, which touches both of your work in terms of international representation and also articulation among countries, which is how do you look and how do you measure the impact of AI in terms of freedom of expression in the times we are living in? I mean, what's the strongest connection you find between those two topics? Adeline, if you want to start.
Thank you, Alex. And well, hi, everyone. Well, there are a lot of connections between media freedom and the question of generative AI. What I would say is that we have right now, with the digitalization of the freedom of expression and the media environment, media and journalism has been confronted to a lot of challenges and obviously a lot of opportunities. But if we focus on the challenges, which I think this is what we're going to speak about now, we're right now in what we call sometimes a little bit of a perfect storm with a combination of different crises. And I would say three main crises for the media. One is the crisis of trust. That is not really new. Trust in media has been declining over the past 15, 20 years. And the point is, each of these crises that I'm going to mention are being reinforced by generative AI and these questions. So, for instance, the trust in media right now, we see that people are also having other sources of information then as a result. And one of them is that people increasingly rely on, not anymore on media to access public interest information, but for instance, the content creators. But recently, in the recent reports about from Thomson Reuters, they say that actually also generative AI has entered this way that people access information. The other crisis is I would start with the crisis of accessibility and visibility of journalism content on social media platform. I think, Julia, you're going to speak much more about that, so I will let you describe this more in detail. But the point is, right now, the fact that people access information on social media also means that there are new intermediaries in the way information is being distributed and accessed. And those new intermediaries are the tech platforms that are becoming as well the gatekeepers. And they also decide what the people are going to see, what the people are not going to see in terms of information. And because of AI and sometimes algorithmic opacity, journalism information is not what is being prioritized online. So that's the second, I think, crisis, again, reinforced by AI. And the third one is and all of them are interconnected, is the crisis of viability of media. And the fact that the business model of media have been severely affected by the shifting in the advertising revenues to tech platforms. And we have a lot of questions around how now media can survive this. And again, reinforced by this question of AI. So, yeah, I'm just going to stop here. I'm sure Julia has a lot to say around the second crisis, actually, and that's the report you've been doing.
Thank you. And how you, as part of OSCE, see the situation?
Yeah, thanks a lot. I mean, I fully subscribe to Adeline's point. So just to add on, I think these three crises you underlined, it's also maybe to take back a step. I think, first of all, we can look at what AI even means. So there we can look at AI. Do we speak about social media? Do we speak about search? Do we speak about generative AI and conversational kind of chatbots? All of them impact journalism, and all to a certain degree differently, right? And they all reinforce the crisis you have been mentioning also differently. But they're all interlinked, as you say. So I think it's important to first know what we are talking about specifically with regard to this three categories, but also to understand that AI also intersects or impacts at each point of the value chain in journalism. So it impacts or it transforms, let's put it that way. It transforms how information is produced, disseminated, accessed, but also monetized, which is also very important, obviously, for journalism. So it's this perfect storm if we take it together. The way that we looked at it from the perspective of the OSCE and the Media Freedom Representative is kind of 3 V's. So the visibility and viability are the two that you already mentioned, but also the vigilance and safety, which is, again, very interlinked. So if we look at this point that you mentioned of the way that currently AI is being used in content ranking, in algorithmic recommender system, for example, in social media, we see that there is this engagement focus, so that journalism really struggles, or like we have to struggle for news visibility, while at the same time we have the increase of content that's problematic or less maybe conducive to democratic debate, which again is a vicious circle, right? And then we also see for the viability, if the visibility is reduced, but we still have revenue by the media through these intermediaries, and this is captured by big tech. Because the big tech companies, they really own kind of all of it, right? They own everything from the undersea cables to the clouds in the skies and everything in between.
So, and buy the data to train.
Exactly. So we really have this combination. So I think the interlinked nature is super important to point out. And currently still the business model of media is being broken almost, I think we can say. But as long as we have this advertising revenue for media where the advertising market is captured by big tech and AI companies, it means if the journalistic content gets less visible, there's also no financial trace anymore. And increasingly, we see also this not only happening in search, in social, but also in search, where now you see a lot of these AI-generated summaries, which limits the click-through rate, so no more money for the journalists. So it's really this vicious circle. Then at the same time, the content prioritization of engagement and sensational polarizing content, if you will, that increases the revenue for the companies, means also that hatred and harassment targeting the media is also being boosted. So it's really the perfect storm on all these different levels. And it's really because of this concentrated power and control that you have for the entire information ecosystem.
Yeah, since you said you have several categories of how AI can impact, I'd like to go back a little bit for the matter of algorithms mediating the world that we are living in, which even before the Gen AI or the agentic AI, how the mediation of algorithms is impacting the spread of disinformation in UNESCO perspective, in your perspective, Adeline?
Thanks. Well, I think we've just described a little bit like the question about the algorithmic, as you say, it's different from generative AI. It's something that is already older. We've been working, if you think about it, it's not so long that we actually have realized like what is this black box of this AI pushing content, because I've been working on a project called Social Media for Peace, where we were trying to understand at the time, and the project started like, I don't know, now I would say 7-8 years ago. At the time, we didn't really know what kind of content is being pushed through the algorithm. And through these kind of projects and many other research projects, we started understanding that the algorithm is rewarding engaging content, like those that are like pushing emotions, etc. And therefore, not necessarily the public interest, like the public interest information, but rather, and not only, but harmful content very often and disinformation. And I think this was one of the learning experience that we started working on with AI, and now we have a second wave of new challenges and issues that are coming up with generative AI. But that was already the learning. And I think we've already started defining ways to address this. But now we need to define new ways of addressing the new...
So like the authorship.
Exactly. Those are, exactly. Yeah.
Just maybe to add two things, because I agree it's very much linked to this like the old problems, but still existing problems, right? In the platform environment where we see the business model, like the core business model of engaging content is bad for journalism, good for disinformation. So we have to address this. And I think it's also interesting because you described this pathway also of more understanding. And I think it's also reflected in regulatory approaches, right? Where now, at least in some jurisdictions and mainly in the EU, we have this Digital Services Act that addresses the content moderation part. So it addresses these questions, but it doesn't go so much into the curational aspect. So exactly this point of what is being boosted, because the conversation started very early and you do have the risk assessment and specific attempts, but it is reflecting of discussions that obviously took place earlier. So I fully agree that there's still a need to go further there, but also to think about what is new with generative AI. And there, I think when we speak about disinformation, the broad sense, so it can also include behavior, inauthentic behavior, right, or other things. Then we also have to take examples of hallucination. I mean, this is a bit of an industry term because it's errors, right? Yeah. And it's calculated, designed errors. But this, of course, also contributes to this conversation, the question of what can we trust? And then it plays back to this crisis of trust, because I think the risk with disinformation is not only that we don't know what not to trust, but we also lose trusting what is true and what we can trust. And I think for democracy, if we don't trust anything, that's obviously as detrimental or even more detrimental than risking that individual people believe individual pieces of wrong information.
Yeah, perfect. And Adeline, talking about media and information literacy, which is the biggest topic and one of the priorities of UNESCO worldwide. Yeah. And I'm thinking about internet for trust too. Mm-hmm. How does MIL can address the governance of the platforms in terms of regarding trust and regarding accuracy to access to information and press freedom?
It's true that media information literacy has become a real flagship for UNESCO, but I wouldn't say that it's the only priority. In fact, we try to have a really holistic approach to the question of information integrity. It's how we now try to define this. And we work on a really like whole society approach, multi-stakeholder approach that is really important. So it's good that you mentioned indeed the question and this conference that was held in 2023, Internet for Trust, because the result of that was the adoption of guidelines for digital platform governance. And these guidance, they bring forward different kind of principles to move towards more accountability, transparency, multi-stakeholderism, commitment to human rights, etc. of platforms. But as part of this, there is a really important part that is the user empowerment side. And that's also why the work we do within the media information literacy is very complementary to the work that the others are doing with the duty bearers. We work with the rights holder, with the people. And I think these are the two sides of the coin. We need to really, we should never separate them. And it's really important to have an empowered civil society, empowered users on social media platform. But what does it mean concretely? It's like, we can build capacity. We will speak about that. We can train. But it's not enough because technology is changing very quick. It's very hard for us to, keep the race of the change of technology. And, imagine that a reform of a curricula can sometimes take up to 7 years. So how do we make sure that within school we have, things up to speed and that our training resources, we need to change the idea that in fact, user empowerment needs to be embedded in the digital platform governance framework, which means that the platforms need to develop technologies that by design are empowering for users, meaning that you can have simple tools that provide explainability. Instead of us training how to find the information could already be there. And then you give as well more agency to the people to decide what kind of algorithm they want. But before you do that, they need to understand, how this is working. But how to give through digital tools as well, more agency to users. I think that's really one of the objectives.
Just
can I add something?
Yes, of course.
Sorry. I love this point on it's about empowerment, right? Yeah. Because I think this is also this other term that is being used a lot now that has to be given the significance is resilience, right? So it's also really about understanding all of it and not and this is also the approach by UNESCO and the OSCE that literacy is necessary, but alone not sufficient, right? And it can also not be this upskilling of understanding which tools to use, but rather to understand the complexity of it. And I think another point is to also see it in parallel to these are structural issues, systemic risks we spoke about before, right? So this can, of course, not be solved only by literacy. But then there's also this additional angle that I think is important to say, we need the understanding, we need the literacy, we need to have the awareness of the people, the empowerment, but then we also need to have alternatives. So we also really have to invest in limiting the dependencies, be it now of the media and journalists or of individuals, by having alternative technology available that is in the public interest, that it's not being designed in this engagement, kind of disinformation boosting design, but that it really has the individual, the public interest, democracy kind of at the core of the design.
Because we are talking about media information literacy is a kind of epistemological umbrella, yeah. And so since we are here, both are here, I'd like to understand from UNESCO perspective, how can you define media information literacy in terms of the sets of skills? Because we have not one right definition. We have several scholars defining it along the time. But I know that UNESCO have been collecting documents and also making books and systematizing knowledge about this. And you have a framework. So how can you address this specific?
It's going to be hard to go into the detail of that really big framework that we have. But I think one thing that really matters to us is to remind that media information literacy is just not, because, let me go back. We've done a survey about media information literacy global state of play. And what we've learned from that is that the majority of countries and everyone recognize the importance of media information literacy. But when we go granular and we try to understand what exactly do they mean by media information literacy, we realize that it doesn't mean what we mean at UNESCO, meaning a very big importance related to critical thinking skills. Yeah. And I will not go into all the details of the competency framework that is really big and it goes beyond. But so we want to focus on that. The other thing is also, when it comes to media information literacy, is to remind the interconnection with media freedom, for instance, and the interconnection with other kinds of literacy. I think what we also see right now is that, there are different kinds of literacy popping up all the time. Mm-hmm. Right now, there is in many countries, AI literacy, digital literacy, etc. In the end, what matters to us is no matter how you call it, for us, media information literacy is kind of an umbrella framework, but you have to go really and ensure that when we speak about digital skills, etc., we have all these questions about helping users to navigate this information ecosystem with critical thinking, a critical mind. So, yeah.
And Julia, I asked Adeline about a specific document of UNESCO, and I know your OSCE has a lot of different guidelines and frameworks, but I'd like to talk specifically about the recent release, Safeguarding Media Freedom in the Age of Big Tech Platforms, which we have here in our show, and in our show, but I'd like to. This is part of a larger program, yeah. I'd like to hear a little bit more. How do you address this to the big techs and the media freedom issues?
Yeah. Thanks so much. So I think maybe to start with this last question, how we try to address it, the way we see it as an intergovernmental organization is that we approach it from the perspective of the state. So it's also to a certain degree complementary to what Adeline said regarding the user empowerment and working with the rights holder. Of course, holistic approach, it's also interlinked, but to also really look at what is the international human rights framework. And looking at that, we know that states have even the positive obligation, right, to provide support in case a private actor interferes with the right to freedom of expression and media freedom. So this is the starting point of the conversation. The second starting point of the conversation is building on everything we discussed now. The information ecosystem is captured by big tech and increasingly AI companies. So what is the obligation? The obligation is to free this captured space from this concentrated power. There's, of course, unfortunately, not a single solution to do so, but there is a set of different policy approaches, regulatory approaches that have been tried, that have been discussed, that are being considered. that are being explored in academia and other contexts by being advocated by civil society, by journalists, etc. So how can we compile all of it? This is the approach that we took to say, in an almost 2-year-long process with really 150 experts from across the globe, to say, how can we take all this knowledge, experience, and expertise together to assess what has been tried, what has worked, what hasn't worked, why, and to build on that to say, what or how can we build general principled recommendations based on this and based on these 2 starting points, right? To solve it. And then obviously there are several entry points. There are a lot of different things. If we speak about visibility, what are different policies? Might obligations for due prominence work? Or do they risk to entrench power? Maybe they work in some contexts, but not in others. So what about transparency approaches or interoperability, empowering the users, right? If we mandate this, maybe this is safer. Because if we get into the question of prominence, then you have the risk, who defines what is public interest and what, like, how do you define it, right? So we have a bit of also this step-by-step approach, because it depends so much on the context, on the rule of law context. And then if we speak about the viability, I mean, we have seen in certain countries bargaining codes, we have seen some obligations for compensation, but then we also saw the retaliation. So these are a lot of lessons that we can learn. What does it mean? So we explore, can maybe digital taxes help? So there's really a set. And when we speak about safety, there is, of course, not only the specific protection tools in case harassment, for example, occurs, but also how can we build this system in a more safety by design approach. And we provide both this kind of urgent mitigation measures where we think this is what needs to be done, but we also try not to lose kind of focus of this more long-term vision of where do we actually want to go to decrease these dependencies, and to keep that in mind always, like, what is the long-term public interest infrastructure and technology that we want to foster, and where media freedom can kind of flourish. And then, of course, the recommendations, because we try to have it on a principled manner, that means sometimes they're formulated in a quite cautious way, right? Because, as I said, contexts differ. We see this democratic backsliding everywhere, unfortunately. So it's really this intention to also recognize there is not the one-size-fits-all solution, but it's a toolbox. And I think it's also, and maybe this links back to the initial point of we have this perfect storm and all this crisis and the trust. And I think a lot of people, including policymakers, really feel overwhelmed because it is overwhelming. I mean, also us are very overwhelmed very often, right, about the complexity of all of it. So what we're really trying also with this policy manual is to say, there's a lot of things you can do. A lot of things have been tried. A lot of things where we have experience and knowledge, and giving it to policymakers, and also obviously to multipliers, so to working with others, because these are things we can only solve together and jointly, to say what can be a kind of entry point to improve the situation here and here and here and there, and then to identify where do we want to go.
Great. You're talking about overwhelming. So we are full of information. It's a complex topic. At the same time, the festival, this word means that there are a lot of things going parallel, a lot of different speeches talking about. So just a final statement for each one of you, just to wrap up. If you want to save the most important information about what we have talked, and to this guy who is there, this lady who is there, to take to the bed with and think during the night, what would be?
That's very hard, Alex, what you're asking us. But no, one thing I didn't speak about maybe is that there is a very strong interconnection between media information literacy and media freedom. We spoke about, the question of now the digital platform governance, but I do think that a population that is fully aware of the value of journalism, that is fully aware and that wants to defend journalists. I mean, think about what happened when I'm French and when things happened with the attacks on Charlie Hebdo. Millions of people in the street is a really powerful response. And for me, that's why I don't want to disconnect sometimes the media information literacy with media freedom directly. It's not just freedom of expression, it's also like really the media freedom. So that would be my word.
Very nice. So thanks for giving me 2 minutes to be able to think. I think because of the complexity, it's important to understand one's role, right? we all have different roles to play, but we all have roles to play. So what can we do from the perspective of an international organization, from academia, from civil society, but also as an individual consumer or citizen, and then try to kind of build on that, right? And say, where can I contribute to increasing information integrity and media freedom, freedom of expression, all of that. And then also demand that others do it, including the policymakers, and collaborate in these efforts, of course, because we need this holistic, multi-stakeholder, whole of society approach.
So thank you very much for you both.
Thank you.
We follow with more EAVI Conversations soon. Be tuned.